So, I turned 51 in a few days, and I am honestly surprised I am still alive. I have pulled enough boneheaded stunts that I should not still be here, but more on that later. I was wondering the other day as I accelerate past the half-century mark, did I tell my sons everything that I wanted to, or even everything that I should have? Knowing that the famous last words of a redneck are, "Hey y'all, watch this," could be my epitaph. I decide to step out of my comfort zone and pass on what wisdom I have gleaned while still managing to stay alive. I am not saying I have it all figured out. I think that only happens when you take your last breath. I have told my sons that people either have to learn by making mistakes, which is not always a bad thing, but it is always expensive, or they can learn from other people's mistakes. Maybe I can save you some of the cost of wisdom with my advice. My first piece of advice is to be careful who you take advice from. But let us back up a bit. What is advice? Well, maybe it's try this, or jump, you'll make it, or you can study later, or making money is the only thing that matters in life. Maybe it's all guns are bad, or simply follow me. If you are as honest with yourself as I tried to be, you realize that you have said some of these things to yourself. Advice is when someone tries to pass on what they think is wisdom. Fine. Now we have to figure out what wisdom is. Maybe wisdom is simply the appropriate way to act on knowledge. Knowledge comes in many shapes. Almost everyone will think of books as a source of knowledge. The bookworm, whatever. But our own observations can produce knowledge. We have to be careful, though. Sometimes books try to pass what they consider wisdom off as knowledge, and sometimes we give ourselves the wrong advice based on our observations. Let me make this real for you. I was a teenager once, and once I saved my money and bought a throwing knife. I also had observable knowledge of how bouncy an old tire is. I proceeded to give myself bad advice. Put the wooden target in the middle of the old tire. That way the new knife will not hit the rocks behind the target if I miss. After the first throw, I made a new observation, that the whine of a knife as it bounces off of an old tire and passes right by my ear produces the Doppler effect. I fortunately had the opportunity to learn the right wisdom from that experience. I did not decide that knives were bad. However, I did learn that I did not have enough respect for them. Advice often comes from lessons or wisdom that people think they learned from an experience. Never blindly follow advice. It is your job to determine if the advice comes from the correct lesson learned from the knowledge. When I was growing up, I had a college class with my cousin, who I looked up to at the time. Our professor was late one day, so my cousin took the opportunity to tell the class what lesson he had learned that day. He lived about 20 miles from town and was running late. He made the same mistake that I would have. Now, he slowed down as he came into town. He was feeling pretty good about shaving some time off his drive when the highway patrol car makes a U-turn right behind him. The officer told him that a highway patrol plane had caught him speeding and radioed ahead the description of the car. My cousin said that the lesson he learned was that his next car would have a sunroof. I decided that day that I would be very careful with any advice my cousin gave me in the future. Anytime you take advice from someone, you are placing trust in that person. Think about the people that you place trust in. Are they a friend, a pro athlete, a professor, some guy in a video? One of the best skills you can learn is to identify the knowledge in wisdom and then evaluate the correctness of the advice.